Your baby just grabbed a fistful of your hair during a feeding and won't let go. You gently try to remove those tiny fingers and the grip gets tighter. You try again, and now your baby is holding on with the strength of someone dangling from a cliff. This isn't attitude. This isn't your baby being difficult. What's happening in that moment is a neurological reflex so powerful that your newborn could literally support their entire body weight by their hands alone for up to 10 seconds. And the reason they're doing it has almost nothing to do with your hair specifically, and everything to do with a survival mechanism that's been embedded in human DNA for millions of years. Most parents assume babies grab hair because it's there, because they're curious, because maybe it feels interesting. All of that sounds reasonable, until you learn what's actually triggering this behavior at the neurological level. The mechanism responsible is called the palmar grasp reflex, and it's not a choice your baby is making. It's a spinal reflex, meaning the signal doesn't even reach the brain before the response happens. When pressure hits the palm, sensory neurons in the median and ulnar nerves fire, motor neurons activate, and the fingers clamp down automatically. The entire sequence happens faster than conscious thought, which is why trying to pry your baby's hand open mid-grasp feels like negotiating with a tiny, adorable vice. But here's what makes this genuinely strange. That reflex exists in your baby right now because tens of thousands of generations ago, human infants who couldn't grip died, not sometimes, consistently. The grasp reflex is a genetic artifact from our primate ancestors. Species where mothers were covered in fur and babies had to cling to that fur to survive. If you couldn't hold on while your mother foraged, climbed, or fled from predators, you fell. And falling meant you didn't pass on your genes. The babies who made it were the ones whose grip was strong enough to stay attached no matter what. Your modern human infant, born into a world with car seats and strollers and baby carriers, still has that same ancient wiring. Because evolution doesn't delete code that worked for millions of years just because the environment changed 10,000 years ago. So, why hair specifically? Because to your baby's nervous system, your hair is the closest thing in their environment to fur. It's accessible. It's right there near their hands during feeding or holding. And it has texture. Lots of texture. Hair varies from smooth and fine to thick and coarse. And those differences create rich sensory feedback that your baby's developing tactile system is hardwired to explore. When their palm makes contact and the reflex fires, the experience isn't just mechanical. They're receiving information about pressure, about texture, about how the strands move when pulled. That data is being processed, stored, and used to build the neural architecture that will eventually allow them to control their hands voluntarily. Now I need to tell you about something that happens during nursing that most parents notice but don't understand. You're feeding your baby. Everything is calm, and then you feel it. Both hands reaching up, fingers searching, and the moment they find your hair, they lock on. The grip intensifies as the feeding continues. This isn't coincidental. The palmar grasp reflex is neurologically linked to sucking. When your baby nurses or takes a bottle, the sucking motion activates the grasp reflex simultaneously. The hands and mouth are wired together in infancy, part of a coordinated system that once ensured a baby stayed attached to their mother during feeding. One mother described her 6-week-old spending entire feeding sessions twining her hair around his fingers, watching it fall, grabbing it again, to the point where keeping her hair up became impossible because he would cry at the absence of it. That's not preference, that's a hardwired reflex, finding its target and activating a feedback loop that the baby's brain interprets as correct, safe, normal. The grip itself happens in 2 distinct phases. First, finger closure. The hand makes contact, pressure registers, fingers curl inward. That's phase 1. But phase 2 is what makes it so difficult to break. Once the fingers are closed, any attempt to pull away triggers proprioceptive sensors in the finger tendons. Those sensors detect the pulling force and send a signal that translates to clinging, a secondary tightening response. This is why gently stroking the back of your baby's hand is more effective at releasing the grip than pulling. The stroke interrupts the proprioceptive signal without triggering the clinging phase. What makes this even more remarkable is the timeline. Your baby didn't develop this reflex after birth through practice or observation. Ultrasound imaging has shown fetuses grasping their umbilical cords as early as 16 weeks into gestation. By 28 weeks, the reflex is fully established. Your baby has been practicing this grip since the second trimester, clenching and releasing in the womb, building the neural pathways and muscle patterns they'll rely on after birth. And that practice isn't random. Researchers studying primate development found that species where infants must cling to fur show significantly stronger and more frequent grasping reflexes than species where infants are carried in other ways. The reflex intensity is calibrated to survival need. But there's something else happening beyond the pure mechanics of grip strength and evolutionary holdover, something that explains why this behavior persists, even as your baby grows, and why it starts to look less like reflex and more like intentional action. Because around 4 months, something shifts. The automatic nature of the grasp starts blending with emerging voluntary control, and that's where the behavior gets genuinely interesting. Your baby begins reaching for your hair before their palm makes contact, tracking it visually, adjusting their hand position mid-reach. What started as pure spinal reflex is now becoming integrated with conscious intent, and the reason that transition matters reveals something profound about how infant brains build the capacity for deliberate movement from raw instinct. By 3 months, the transformation is unmistakable. Watch a 3-month-old reach for hair and you'll notice something different. The hand opens before contact. The arm adjusts trajectory mid-movement. The eyes track the target with focus that wasn't there weeks earlier. This is the nervous system doing something extraordinary. It's taking a hardwired spinal reflex and pulling it forward into conscious control, integrating it into the developing motor cortex where voluntary movement lives. The process is called reflex integration, and it's not passive. The nervous system actively suppresses the automatic reflex response, pushing it into the background while simultaneously building new neural pathways that allow the same physical movement to happen by choice. Your baby is learning to grasp intentionally by practicing on the same reflex that once fired without thought. And hair remains the preferred training material, because of what it offers that toys and rattles don't. Texture variation within a single object. Every strand feels slightly different. Movement responsiveness. Hair reacts to grip pressure in ways rigid objects can't. Visual feedback. Your baby can watch the strands slip through their fingers, linking what they feel to what they see. Between 4 and 6 months, you'll notice the grip itself changes. It's no longer just fingers closing. Now there's thumb opposition, the thumb moving independently to press against the fingers. This is one of the most significant motor milestones in human development, the pincer grasp. And hair pulling is one of the ways babies teach themselves how to coordinate it. They're building the same fine motor control that will eventually let them pick up a single Cheerio, hold a crayon, button a shirt. But there's a critical window here that parents need to understand. The reflex should be fading by 6 months. If your 8-month-old still shows the automatic palm closure response, if their hand clamps shut every time something touches their palm, without any reaching or visual tracking beforehand, that persistence can signal something worth discussing with a pediatrician. An unintegrated reflex past 6 months can indicate issues with central nervous system development. Not always. Some babies integrate reflexes on their own timeline, but developmental specialists are clear. Early identification changes outcomes because the brain's neuroplasticity, Its ability to rewire itself is never higher than it is in the first 2 years. Now, here's where the behavior shifts into something that looks less like development and more like habit. Around 6 to 8 months, some babies start pulling hair, not because of reflex, not even for sensory exploration, but because they've learned it does something. It gets a reaction. You pull hair, the person responds. Maybe they make a sound. Maybe they adjust how they're holding you. Maybe they give you attention. Your baby's brain is now sophisticated enough to understand cause and effect at a social level, and hair pulling becomes a tool for interaction. One parent described her 8-month-old pulling hair specifically during transitions, being put down for a nap, being passed to another caregiver, any moment of separation or change. The hair pulling wasn't exploration, it was communication. The baby had learned that grasping hair kept the parent engaged for a few seconds longer. That's not manipulation. That's an infant using the only language available to express discomfort with change. This is also when hair pulling can become a self-soothing behavior. Some babies develop a pattern of twirling or tugging their own hair, or a caregiver's hair when tired, overwhelmed, or understimulated. The repetitive motion serves the same function as thumb sucking or rocking. It regulates their nervous system. And like those behaviors, it's completely normal unless it becomes compulsive or causes harm. Parents dealing with this phase have options beyond just enduring it. Redirection works, but only if it's offered consistently and without strong emotional reaction. When your baby grabs hair, calmly remove their hand with that gentle stroke across the back that interrupts the clinging phase. Then immediately offer an alternative, a textured toy, a soft blanket, a teething ring. The key is providing sensory input that matches what hair offers: varied texture, movement response, visual interest. Some parents find that giving their baby a small square of satin or a soft brush to hold during feeding eliminates the hair grabbing entirely. Others keep their hair tied back or covered during high-risk times. These aren't failures of bonding. They're practical accommodations that let both parent and baby stay comfortable while the behavior naturally fades. Because it does fade. By 9 to 12 months, most babies have moved past the intense hair-grabbing phase. They've integrated the reflex. They've developed voluntary fine motor control. They've found other ways to self-soothe and communicate. The hair might still get grabbed occasionally, but it's no longer the dominant sensory-seeking behavior it was at 4 months. What remains is everything that behavior built. Stronger hand and finger muscles, neural pathways connecting touch, sight, and intentional movement, a foundation of fine motor control that will support every physical skill they develop going forward. Your baby wasn't just annoying you during those months of relentless hair pulling. They were constructing the biological infrastructure that makes them capable of interacting with physical objects in increasingly sophisticated ways. So the next time those tiny fingers lock onto your hair with that impossible grip strength, remember what's actually happening. A reflex that kept infant primates alive for millions of years is being slowly, methodically transformed into conscious control. Your baby is learning that their body responds to their intentions, that they can choose to reach, to grasp, to release, that the world is something they can touch and manipulate and explore, and they're learning it one handful of hair at a time, building toward the moment when they'll pick up a spoon, turn a page, hold your hand by choice instead of reflex. You're not just tolerating the hair grabbing. You're witnessing the exact moment a hardwired survival instinct becomes a chosen action. Every pull, every grip, every strand wrapped around those tiny fingers is your baby teaching themselves what it means to move with purpose. That reflex their ancestors needed to survive is now the foundation for everything their hands will ever do.